Hello and good evening. I'm Melissa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Dewan Rakyat has just appointed Mas Imayati Samsudin from Perikatan Nasional as chairperson of the Public Accounts Committee and Wong Shuki from Pakatan Harapan as deputy chair. The PSC is responsible for scrutinizing government expenditure and ensuring that public funds are used accountably, with accountability. So an important role, but how can this committee be better empowered to serve its role? So joining me on the show now is Wong Kar-Wah. He is the DAP MP for Taiping and the former chairperson for PAC in the previous, before the dissolution of Parliament last year. Kar-Wah, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. Can we begin by just touching on the important role that the PAC plays? I mean, why is a strong and effective PAC important? And is there public awareness as to the role that the PAC plays in good governance?
Okay, of course, first and foremost, everyone knows that the PAC plays a very large role in the check and balance on all the administrations of the government. And of course, PAC being one of the permanent standing committee in the parliament. In the past few years, I believe we have managed to bring up a lot of issues. We have managed to investigate some of the issues that the people's concern the most, and especially after 2018, after the chairmanship is entrusted to the opposition's MP, it has further enhanced the role of PAC and the effectiveness of PAC. So you have an opposition member sitting there as a chair, together with a government member sitting there as a vice chair, and the member of parliaments from both sides. Is clearly proof that 2008 was a very, very right move. And of course, if we talk about the public awareness, from my experience, of course, we have a few cases that have caught the attention from the public. There is, of course, number one, the LCS, the MySejahtera apps procurement, MySejahtera apps procurement, this vaccine, COVID-19 vaccine procurement, and so on. But of course, apart from that, PAC also did a lot of works as to launch further investigations on the matters taken out by the Auditor Generals. And a lot of it, because some of it may be administrative in nature, some of these may have some problems were pointed out by the Auditor General as to how the government system can be improved and so on. This may not catch the eyeballs of the public, but it's still very important for a government to have a better administration. So the PAC is playing a very large role, and of course, I would like to take the opportunity to congratulate YB Mas Imirati and YB Wong Suki, and I trust that both of them will be able to carry PAC to a greater height.
Okay, so the PAC, the new PAC chair and deputy, they want to call for open proceedings. Is that a good idea? Is that I mean, where do you see the difficulties in implementing that?
Actually, if you notice, in the past 4.5 years, we have been calling for the open proceedings, but due to whatsoever reason, the effort has gone in vain. And in the past few years, we also had numerous calls especially to the speaker and also to the government, to allow the PAC to have open proceedings. You see, when PAC is part of the government proceedings, and when it's part of the parliamentary proceedings, and when we have these parliamentary proceedings at the main chamber, and also the parliamentary proceedings at the Kamahas being broadcasted live, at least on YouTube and also on RTM website, and there is no reason why the PAC proceedings cannot be open. And this is something that we, the new government, need to achieve and need to implement, because in PAC, I think the Rakyat has the rights to know, have the first-hand information as to how the proceedings is being conducted and what are the evidence adduced from the committee. Of course, in the past, all the proceedings are being recorded word by word, verbatim in the handset, but that is not sufficient because for a better to enhance the transparency and for the rights of the people to know, to have the first-hand information, live proceeding is a must. Of course, we are not calling for every proceedings it must be live because some of the proceedings may involve national interest, and that part can be taken off at the discretion of the chairman. That is always our stand, and I hope in the next 1 or 2 years, the government can really put serious thought about it, serious attention about it, and once the PAC's proceedings is open, that will mean the PAC will go a step further, delivering its duty to check and balance on the government. And I hope this can be done, and I believe this will be done. Technically, no issue. We have confirmed with the Dewan that all the cameras, everything's are all ready. Even the channels at the Dewan channels is also ready. It just wait for the speaker and the governments to say that yes.
Okay. So it can be done. It just needs the green light. Okay.
Correct.
Based on your experience, Kawa, as the former chairperson, what do you think? What kind of support and resources can be provided to the PAC so that it can be more effective? I'm just wondering where you might see the PAC needs to be shored up.
Okay, of course, there are a few matters. Number one, we have been discussing about the open proceedings. So that is, I wouldn't say this kind of support is something that, but it's something really that will bring PAC into a new height. So where people can see it openly and when people can see it on live, that is one. Number two, of course, PAC compared to the rest of the Parliamentary Special Select Committee, we are more, we are empowered with more human resources. We have at least 8 to 10 staff, supporting staff in PAC office. But of course, that is still not enough because when the PAC proceedings are ongoing, every one of them are actually working until late night to get things done. So we, the PAC secretary actually need more supporting staff in terms of course, also include researchers and so on. These are the supporting staff that we strongly require. 8 to 10 members, 8 to 10 staff are not sufficient. Some of the staff may be doing some audit work, some of the staff may be leading, and some of the staff may be doing some clerical work. But on top of it, we need more hands, we need more resources. That's one. So, and lastly, on the reports of the PAC, we have been trying to enhance the credibility and also the effectiveness of our report by improving the follow-up actions after the report was tabled. So in the past few years, you can see, apart from the main report, we will have the follow-up reports. We call it laporan tindakan susulan. And what is still lacking until now is the debate of the report. During Tan Sri Azhar time, I have been repeatedly asking for the reports to be debated, and the answer given to me was that, okay, look, YD, you can submit a private motion for the matter to be debated, but of course, a lot of time the private motion will be put behind the government motion. And at least to me, every session there must be 2 to 3 days being allocated for the debate of the PAC's report. For example, if there is a 7 or 8 week sittings, at least the 2 or 3 weeks, you allocate 1 full day for the debate of the report, and every day at least you can debate 2 of the reports tabled by the PAC. So it all also depends on how many reports being tabled. If there are no reports tabled, there is nothing to be debated. But if there are reports tabled, and my suggestion is that for every session, at least let's allocate 2 to 3 days, full days for the report to be debated.
Okay, well, very quickly, I also want to touch on the 10 Parliamentary Special Select Committees that the Dewan Rakyat has approved for this parliamentary term. What do you make of them? How do we better empower the PSSCs, similar to empowering the PAC?
Okay. Of course, as I said just now, PAC is a permanent committee, permanent parliamentary committee. It had been in working for in the past many decades, and PSSC is something new that was introduced back in 2018. But of course, previously also we have quite a number. But after 2018, it has been so-called institutionalized, although it is not in the standing order yet. And from what I can see, this time around, because in the past few years, during the proceedings of PSSC, we always see there are two main problems. Number one, the PSSC need to listen, not say to listen, need to depend on the minister to refer the matter to them. That's number one. Number two, the PSSC in the past, they also might face some problems when it comes to summoning some of the civil servants, the ministers, or some of the witnesses. And these two parts, from what I can see, is from the Penyata Dewan, which have been tabled on the 21st of March. On these two parts, matters has improved a lot, whereby the term of reference for PSSC is still the term of reference for PSSC has been improved to the effect that the PSSC can take up any matter relating to the ministry, without the nod from the minister themselves. So that is a very big breakthrough. But of course, compared to PAC can do everything, can investigate anything under the sky, but the PSSC can investigate the matters that is touching on the ministry that the PSSC is involved. So that is one. Secondly, we also have seen some of the ministers or civil servants or witnesses refuse to attend PSSC proceedings. And this never happened in PSC proceedings. And this time around, I can see from the Penyata Dewan itself, the Dewan committee, the Jawatan Kuasa Dewan, has actually decided that new guidelines to empower the PSSC to call any witnesses that they wish to. And if, of course, in the middle of the process, anything happen or the witnesses refuse to come, the speaker can interfere to get the witness to attend the proceedings. And I think these two are the main areas where we managed to achieve a huge leap in empowering and in giving backs to the PSSC that we have. But of course, PSC in comparison can do a lot of things, can investigate anything under the sun, and of course PSSC will confine to the particular subject that they are attached to. But what I hope is that at the end of the day, be it PSC or PSSC, if the chairman or the deputy or the committees are committed, I believe all these committees can discharge their duty well, can play a very big role in check and balance against the government administration. And with that, I always emphasize previously, with that, those who are whoever sitting in the government, be it any coalition parties, my coalition parties or the other side, they will know whatever they have decided, whatever they are going to decide, there will be a pair of eyes watching at them at all times. So they will be very careful.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with me. I appreciate your time. That was Wong Kawo, DAP member for Taiping and former chairperson of PAC. We're going to take a very quick break here and consider this. We will be right back. Stay tuned. Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris. We're discussing how recently Dewan Rakyat approved 10 Parliamentary Special Select Committees for the 15th parliamentary term, and they've empowered these PSSCs with a stronger oversight mechanism over ministries. Joining us now to discuss the importance of these new oversight guidelines, we have Parliamentary and Institutional Development Specialist Maha Balakrishnan. Maha, thank you for joining me on the show today. How exactly do these new guidelines empower the Parliamentary Special Select Committees? I mean, what were the previous weaknesses that these guidelines now strengthen?
Well, I think in previous committees, we noted that there were a couple of challenges that they faced. Uh, some of the main issues actually relate to the calling of witnesses to give evidence. So when witnesses refused to comply with a request from a committee, the situation seemed to hit an impasse, and the committee wasn't able to proceed further to enforce their powers. But apart from that, there was also disagreements as to whether previous select committees had the authority to conduct inquiries within their policy remit, or whether they needed to get additional approval from a minister or a resolution from the House for every single inquiry that they wanted to conduct. So I think what we see with the new terms of reference plus the guidelines is that they address some of these previous concerns. So I should say, full disclosure in relation to the guidelines, I was involved in the drafting of them. So the purpose of the guidelines really was for a number of different users. First of all, they set out the legal and constitutional source of every committee's power and authority, and also the obligation of public servants to give evidence to these committees. But at the same time, they also explain the protections that all witnesses before committees have, which is that they cannot be punished by their superiors if they give truthful and accurate evidence to committees. And I think that's key. Now, the other issue that the guidelines address, which is of great concern to public servants, is about the nature of some of the evidence that they are called upon to provide to committees. So these guidelines actually set out a very clear process to follow if any information required by a committee is either secret or a matter of national security.
Okay, Maha, if I may just kind of zoom out for a sec here, the special select committees, I think I'm not sure everyone understands how they work and the role that they play within the legislative process. Can you very quickly, very briefly outline for those who may not be familiar with their role, what exactly a PSSC does?
Sure. So now two of Parliament's main functions are lawmaking and oversight and scrutiny of the government. So parliamentary committees are considered the most important tool or vehicle within Parliament to carry out these functions effectively. Now, there are a number of reasons for this. The first one, of course, is that committees have more functional powers. By this, I mean that they can call for evidence. Yeah, they have the power to call for evidence, which the plenary of the House, the 222 members sitting in plenary, don't have. Secondly, committees also have the ability to set their own agenda. They can decide what to inquire into, how much of it to inquire into, and who to speak to. Whereas in the plenary of the House, in the floor of the House, both the lawmaking and policy agenda is controlled by the government of the day. Yeah. Now, thirdly, committees are allowed to work longer than the House because they can work even when House is adjourned. But I think the more important aspect, and this is the fourth benefit of committees, is that, you know, it's from a behavioral perspective, actually, because on the floor of the House, MPs are usually politicians first and foremost. But in committees, they can be statesmen and stateswomen. And by this, I mean that often when it comes to committee inquiries and committee proceedings, MPs often leave the political rhetoric and the grandstanding at the door of the committee room. Yeah, and when they're away from the public limelight, when they are faced with tangible evidence, what we have seen across the world is that they will always act according to principles, they will follow the data, and they're more willing to work together. See this demonstrated by the Public Accounts Committee in the Dewan Rakyat. I think it's very clear. So I think that's what we can look forward to, hopefully. And now just a fifth and final point about the benefit of committees. And it's for all of us who are not politicians. Yeah, those of us that are policy advocates, those of us that are stakeholders, committees are also going to be critical because it will be an avenue for us to be able to put forward our own arguments and our own positions on various policies.
Right. Just on that note of working together, of bipartisanship within a PSSC, we now know the who's going to make up the members of the select committees. What do you think of that, Maha? Does that does the composition matter in terms of what's being investigated or what's being looked at under a select committee?
Well, of course it does. I think one of the issues that is commonly discussed about the committee makeup is the balance of representatives from different sides of the political aisle. And I think there will be some people who are quite unhappy about the fact that there are 6 members from the government bloc and 3 from the opposition. But we have to remember that this is based on an understanding that every committee must represent the balance of the parties within the House. And it just so happens at this point in time, the government has a very clear 2/3 majority. Yeah. Now, if we looked at the balance in the House in the previous administration, it was far more equal. And that is why we saw an almost even representation in each committee. So that's the key difference. But having said that, I think it's also important to note that we are working with a coalition government. And once again, we have seen studies from across the world, examples from across the world, that when you have a coalition government, the committee system is actually quite robust, because coalition parties actually use the committee system as one of the means of monitoring each other, monitoring their political bargain, making sure that the policy agenda that they've agreed to as a group is carried out, making sure that there are no maladministration issues within the government of the day as well.
Well, can I ask you then how to then better support and give the resources needed to these parliamentary select committees so that they can be effective, so that they can, do they have KPIs? Do they need to have a certain number of reports that come out every year? I mean, how do we know what's being done within each parliamentary select committee?
Yeah, so there are no KPIs, but if I could just dial back a little, the issue of support and resources, it's not just the committees that need it. Even the government departments and public bodies who will appear before committees, they also need support. Yeah, but let's start with the committees. So what are the essentials? Clearly, financial resources is foremost. But it isn't simply enough to give them sufficient resources. What they actually need is a consistent source of funding. Yeah, so effective committees plan their work almost a year or 2 years ahead of time, while needing to build in the flexibility to take on urgent inquiries. So there needs to be an element of certainty about a baseline annual budget. So linked up to this actually is the second most important resource, which is human resource. Now here we've seen some improvements over the last few years. There is better dedicated staffing for Dewan Rakyat committees, but they're still sharing human resources, and that's not ideal. Each committee should have its own dedicated set of administrative and research staff, but also the ability to appoint external independent researchers and advisors if necessary. And tied into all of this is the question of not simply quantity of resources, but quality. Committees will not be able to function effectively if they cannot work independently. And this holds true of their staff and advisors as well. There should be no question that the influence of the executive branch can permeate into committees through their staff, or because the executive controls the purse strings. So it is more critical now than ever, I believe, to have an independent parliamentary services where parliamentary employment is not reliant in any way on the executive branch.
Okay, so these guidelines, these new guidelines that you had a hand in drafting, Maha, they go some ways in strengthening parliamentary special select committees. But where else? How far can we go? How can PSCs better evolve to provide the oversight that the public deserves?
Okay, well, I think first and foremost, we really need to set up a permanent committee system, right? I think it is really unacceptable in the 21st century that we are still reliant on the will and on the benevolence of the parties who win an election as to whether or not we will have a committee system, let alone the powers that committees will be given and the scope that committees will be given. So we really do need to move forward on making sure that some of these committees become permanent committees exactly like the PAC. The second issue is actually one of inclusivity. So while the current TORs, I think, are a great improvement on previous terms, some issues have not been addressed. For example, having more public inquiries and public hearings, that's one. And tied to this is the ability of stakeholders to also submit evidence. So there should be really a better system of setting up public calls for evidence. And linking up to that is then the requirement, I think, should be imposed on committees to share the evidence and the submissions that they receive from different stakeholders, government and non-government stakeholders, in a timely manner as it happens, not at the end of the day. This is so that stakeholders can respond to each other's positions in real time. Now, just finally, on a final point, digitalization. I mean, I don't know why we're still having this conversation now, but really a lot of the information and a lot of the documents from Parliament are not shared online. And even if they are not really in a processable or usable format. So that needs to change. And I think the worst, I think in terms of the different aspects of Parliament, I think we see the least digitalization with committee work. So hopefully that will be improved down the line.
Maha, thank you so much for sharing all these insights about parliamentary reform. We appreciate your time. Thank you. That was parliamentary researcher Maha Balakrishnan wrapping up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.